Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Resi Live. It is Tuesday, and in case you didn't notice, I don't have Mr. Daniel Larson sitting in front of me this week, but I have Max Williams, who we are very excited to talk with.
Good to be here.
And Max, yeah, thanks for coming in. Thanks for being here.
Dude, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, Max, you are from Summit Integrated Systems. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do there.
Yeah, I'm Max Williams is my name. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Summit. I've been there right at 3 years. Actually, this month ends up being my 3-year mark.
Nice. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. Before that, I've been a worship and creative pastor, different churches throughout the country for the past 20 years. I am older than I look. Every time I say that, people are like, wait, what? 20 years, dude. You're like, I promise. No,
Yeah, man. You look good for your age. I don't even know how old you are, to be honest.
Dude, I'll be 42 this year.
Nice.
So I'm 41. I'll be
That's
42 in October. So
you got a couple kids.
I got 2 kids, man.
Nice.
I've been married 18 years. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old.
Nice.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Cool. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, man.
So Summit Integrated. I'm sure a lot of people that are watching probably know about Summit and what Summit is, and have worked with Summit in the past. And Summit, they're actually right up the road. So we're here in Westminster, Colorado, and then Summit, you guys are up in Broomfield, like 15 minutes north of here.
Yeah, Louisville now. Actually.
Oh, Louisville, yeah, sure, yeah. So we were, I think it was probably about a year ago, right after kind of all the COVID stuff was going down. I was emailing with Max, and I'm just like, dude, like we're like 15 minutes away, man. Like we gotta be doing some stuff together and figuring out how to.
Gotten a chance to hang out a lot since then, man.
Yeah, it's been awesome, man. But I want to hear a little bit about your background. I want to hear about some of the stuff that you guys are doing at Summit and everything that's going on there. But we'd love to even just hear a little bit about who is Max. So you told me a little bit about your background, but one of the questions from me in particular is how did you end up doing what you're doing, being in the shadows of church production and being in this, crazy church production world? The
crazy world of church production and integration. So I'm not a very technical dude. Like I can fake it. Like I can fake it well, right? Like, so my background has been on the presenter side of everything. I mean, I've been on stage since I was 18.
Yeah.
My background, I started as an intern at Church on the Move. And goodness, it was 98 when I got to Church on the Move and started doing worship there. Got hired on staff at Church on the Move, was doing a lot of worship in youth ministry. Back then, there was a youth ministry called 180.
Yeah.
It was like the mecca for youth ministry. It was the place. And then got into the recording industry, signed a record deal, moved to Nashville, and helped some friends. My wife and I moved to St. Louis, helped them start a church, and man, it exploded. My wife and I were creative pastors at that church, and we were there about 10 years in St. Louis, and it was incredible just seeing the growth, not just of the church, but the people. We were an all-volunteer team, so then I had to learn. My philosophy is I knew I wasn't a technical person, but I had to oversee and pastor these people, right?
Sure.
So I always like to understand enough for clear communication and for clear vision, right? And so if I'm going to be casting vision for my department, we need to at least understand what it is that they do, the mindset, the philosophies, even the gear. Like I may not know how to work it like the next person, but I need to understand at least what it does, right? So that started just church production world, me being around that a lot more. We hired Summit back then to do our new build because I had no idea what I was doing. And some friends told our pastor that, hey, this church, Life Church, is using Summit Integrated Systems to do all their stuff. And our pastor was like, if it's good enough for Craig Rochelle, it's good enough for us.
Yeah.
So, no, we did this whole interview process, all of that jazz. But really, it was really because Life Church was doing it.
Sure.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest.
Know how that goes.
So, no, man, we had such a great relationship with Summit. I was friends with them. And years later, man, I go back to Church on the Move. I was one of the worship pastors there. And one day we're doing a Seeds conference, and in walks a guy named Tyson Weens and Nick Kofall. who is Nick Kofal is the Chief Vision Officer at Summit, and Tyson's the COO. And they walked in the green room, and small world, we just reconnected, and man, just kept in touch years later. And then they said, hey, why don't you come and work for Summit? So I was like, and do what?
Yeah.
Dude, I'm not technical like you guys. I know what an XLR cable is.
Sure.
Like, I know what a switcher is and cameras. Like, what do you want me to do, man?
You got the whole infrastructure there. You got audio, you got video.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, so Nick Kofal originally hired me to be over one of the client relations managers. And so I started there, and then later on took over as creative director of marketing and communications. So
cool. That's awesome. One of the things we didn't really talk about is what Summit is. I think, like I said, a lot of people are probably familiar with Summit or have worked with them in the past.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what Summit is. First of all, I love to, I'm kind of skipping ahead of things, but one of the things that, you guys say at Summit a lot too is gear follows vision. And like, I think that's part of your story a lot too, right? Is like, you're like, hey, we got to get this vision in place.
Sure.
Got to understand creative people and like production people, because they're a whole different type of person, and how to work with them, how to minister to them, how to, do life with them. And then we're going to figure out what gear is best in your situation and what will help you to do your ministry the best that you can.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. But anyway, so Summit, tell me a little bit about Summit, and tell me a little bit about, why you guys are passionate about doing those things and helping the church.
Yeah. Summit is a complete design build firm. So we work with a lot of new construction projects. We do renovations. We do upgrades for church AVL. All the above. So we are an integrator. But man, we build relationship, we prefer, there's this thing in the industry, people like to do bids, and like, everybody wants the cheapest price, and like, it's cool. It's great. We'll be a part of that process if we need to be. Man, I think we like to stress always that relationship is so key in this whole process, right? Number one, I think, for Summit as a whole, and the heart of who Summit is, you go through our staff, and, we're a staff of old tech directors at churches, and worship pastors, and church planners, and you name it. Every single person on our staff, to my knowledge, has a church background of some sort, right? So we only work with churches. It's the heart of who the people are. Summit doesn't hire anybody that doesn't have a heart for the local church. That's really important to us. I would go to say, if you interviewed most people, probably unanimously at our company, most people would say that they feel called to be at Summit, doing what they're doing, working with a large group of churches. We're a lot of people that we didn't leave our jobs at churches because we were so upset and just ready to leave. Yeah. Churches in general, we have a heart and a passion for them and helping communities. I mean, that's what the church should be about, right? Is preaching the gospel and really equipping the saints, equipping people in their communities to reach other people and preach the gospel. So, man, as a whole, that's who Summit is. That we're passionate about that. And yeah, part of what you hear our team say a lot is gear follows vision. Yeah. We used to say that a lot, when my wife and I were in full-time ministry, and we were pastors over creative departments. There's always, at every church, I'm sure I can go to any church, even watching this now, and there's a closet somewhere that has a stack of gear that no one knows what it's for, who bought it, what it does. Even if you know what it does, you're like, what? Right. Why do we have a PV? Yeah. No offense to
some
PV.
Random P or VBS from years ago or whatever.
Somebody has some weird switcher or lighting something. Yeah. And I think, a lot of times those things happen just because of lack of vision. Yeah. And so we used to tell our teams all the time, hey, let's get a clear vision for this. It's the same thing we say at Summit. Hey, let's get a clear vision for how we're going to use this. In the same way we pitch or we communicate vision to our volunteers, it works the same way with gear. Sure. Let's have a clear vision. Let's communicate that vision. Let's deploy that gear or our volunteers or whoever to be able to do what it is they need to do or they feel called to do. So
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I love how you guys, just as a company too, between everything that you guys do with Summit TV and the other content that you guys put out, you are such a part of the church community, and going deeper than just gear, and saying, hey, we know that gear is going to be a big part of this, but ultimately it starts with your vision. It starts with what you're wanting to do and the ministry that you're wanting to accomplish, and that is so different depending on who they're trying to reach and the part of the world that they're in, and all those things.
Yeah, look, let's be honest, man. Like, we are not the only technical people or company in the game that does this. There's a lot of great technical people, skilled people, knowledgeable people doing this type of work, throughout the country, at churches, everywhere.
Sure.
And so, when I think the heart of who Summit is as a company, as an organization, is this. But whenever I got more involved and took over with marketing and communications, communicated to our team. I had actually a meeting with Nick Kofal, our chief vision officer, and I remember we were talking about, hey, where's this going to go marketing wise?
Sure.
And he had this vision for Summit TV, and we started just saying, hey, let's communicate who we are more so than what we do. People are going to know what we do, and we're going to communicate what we do. Our work is also going to speak for itself, but let's really spend some time focusing on who it is that we are, right? As people, as a company, where our hearts are, and let's let that lead. So that's really been a huge part of our marketing efforts, honestly. Is going, hey, let's communicate who we are. Let's let that be the focus, and then we'll still take some pictures of our suite, the gear racks that our team installs. Man, those dudes are artists. Shout out to the production assembly team and fabrication guys over at Summit. They're artists. Our project managers over at Summit are the best, I'm convinced, in the country. But man, even they would say, hey, let's communicate who we are. Yeah. Right.
It's awesome. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about this past year. Obviously, we were talking about this before, and in 2020, the church went through a massive shift, and companies like Summit were, of course, kind of along for the ride and taking all those, fun midnight phone calls from church technical directors that were trying to get set up for something by Sunday or whatever. And what has this past year been like for you guys, and what have you seen as kind of this shift in how the church operates?
Yeah, it's been interesting. As much as I say I want to forget about 2020 altogether, like it was definitely a learning, season for everyone, right? So, video has been king for everyone, really. During that season, even coming out of it, we're seeing more and more churches that are going, hey, let's put more efforts towards great video, great live stream, of course, great audio for video within that stream. That's always like that tension, right? But man, there was so much change. There was a lot of churches that, said, hey, we don't want to do a great live stream because we want butts and seats,
right?
Yeah. And then the pandemic happened, and they were like, oh shoot, I got to do great video.
Yeah.
And it needs to be live. And so I think the live portion of it, you saw a lot of people move in that direction, because just having to produce great video every single week, post-production was, taxing on a lot of tech directors and media I was talking to churches all over the country, and they were like, oh my goodness, we're wore out. We're the only people that are not getting breaks, right?
Yeah.
So, that was the biggest shift, is seeing those churches that weren't used to doing live or video at that level in general, and then having this switch where they had to almost overnight dive into that. And it's been a tension that we've had to really juggle, even as a team, of going, how do we support that? What's the best way? During the pandemic, we tried to do our best to offer consult to a lot of churches that needed to get up and going, because service has to happen,
right?
Even though there's a pandemic, hey, there still needs to be church, right? So, it's been a growing season for all of us, I think, in figuring out how to support that week to week on that level. Even as a marketing, team for Summit, we've, we were tasked with, hey, we have to figure out how to stay in front of people effectively during the pandemic without, all the conferences were shut down.
Yeah.
And so, the way in which we communicated, we're very organic with the way we build relationships,
Right.
stylistically. We couldn't do that last year. So
Sure.
we had to be great at how we were communicating through media. How are we going to stay in front of people? What does that look like?
Yeah.
So, we were running right on side with the tensions that a lot of churches were facing this past year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What in your mind? I know that obviously there were some struggles. Was there anything that changed positively that you saw from how churches operate and what they do and how they communicate? What did we learn? Was there anything, positive from the churches that you guys work with that kind of came out of this last season?
Man, that's a great question. I think churches are still learning, honestly. I don't think anybody's figured it out, especially because once things started opening back up, then it's like, hey, how do we figure out now how to do both live,
Right.
In service and online? And so some of the great things that I've seen come out of it, man, is really on the side of hey, let's focus on health.
Yeah.
I saw that because in the beginning of the pandemic, it was, hey, we got to grind, get this stuff out. And then it was, hey, let's take a step back. How do we keep our team healthy? That's been great seeing churches actually focus on that and put some efforts towards that. I'm seeing a lot of churches going, hey, man, let's take a step back. Even if we lose some quality, let's make sure that our people are good.
Sure.
Which is like, we probably should have been doing that way before, right?
Yeah.
If this is about people.
Yeah.
But it's been good to see churches take a step back and go, hey, man, let's tone it down just a little bit, keep our people healthy, maybe even create some systems where things are a little bit more automated now, maybe not as custom and boutique so that we can focus more on the people. I've seen worship pastors and tech pastors spend a lot more time with their teams. Hey, how's your family doing? When's the last time you had a break? You know? I think that's probably been the most encouraging thing that I've seen come out of this whole pandemic, really, is people going, are we healthy?
Yeah.
And if we're not, how do we get there?
Right.
Where before, I think it was more of, hey, let's feed the monster every week. Let's grind out. Church is coming. I would say that's probably been the most encouraging thing, and I think the best thing that's come out of last year. Yeah,
definitely. I like that piece about automation too, and just making sure that, for a lot of church technical directors, I'm sure pre-pandemic, it was a nightmare if they left on a Sunday because, who would they have to cover them for all of the 1,000 things that they do? And now, they were kind of forced into this paradigm where, okay, we got to build these systems in place where they're really relied upon on a Sunday. And automating that is really important.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yep. It's cool. What would you say, what are some of the, now coming out of that and kind of returning into this, hey, we're going to open our doors, we're going to focus on, butts and seats again, but we're also going to, think about our online engagement. What are some of the biggest challenges that churches, whether they're, positive or negative, whether they're opportunities or areas that you think the church needs to still work through in order to really get to the ideal type of communication and production that they need to be at?
What comes to my mind is really, I think coming out of season, people really need to, from a programming standpoint, not really from a technical aspect, from a programming standpoint, is going, what's priority? Who's our audience? What's priority? Is that the in-service experience? Is that online? I think, everybody would say it's both. It's really difficult and will be really difficult for a lot of churches to focus on both. It takes a lot of efforts and a lot of planning, a lot of resources to do that. Churches that can, awesome. But I think there's still going to be this tension of going, hey, we need to, or even from a presenter standpoint, from the stage, hey, are we speaking to the person in the room? Are we speaking to the person at home?
Yeah.
If there needs to be a focus, the person at home, can we have an online pastor that's communicating?
Sure.
Because one of the tensions, we've always felt, my wife and I have always said this, you're sitting in a service and there's this amazing experience in a service, and then somebody turns to a camera and goes, hey, everyone, online. And I'm like, oh, shoot, like, you're almost taken out of the experience.
Yeah.
Or if you're vice versa, you're on the other end of it and you're at home and they're talking to you online, and then now they're talking to the room. It's like, oh, wait, I'm not there.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the things I think that churches are going to have to start to figure out is from a programming standpoint, how do we juggle both well?
Sure.
Because there's still some people that are still not comfortable going in, or they're not uncomfortable with leaving the house. They're just more comfortable on Sunday morning sitting in there and going, hey, are we okay with that? As a community, you probably need to be, because that's what's happening. And so figuring out how do we reach those people. I heard a pastor say that their focus is getting in people's pockets in terms of their iPhones. Like that's a huge part of their focus. And so I think those things are going to have to be continually lived in and at attention, but I think it's healthy. I heard a pastor say one time, anything healthy lives in tension.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
And so I think they need to really wrestle with that tension and keep it in front of them.
Yeah, it's really good. I think a lot of churches are feeling that tension right now, and that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, like you're saying. That's understanding, hey, we're going to have to try things. We're going to have to see what works and what fits, again, with our communities and within our context.
Yeah.
And that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah.
Kind of even related to that, again, kind of going back to Gear Follows Vision too, one of the questions I have for you is really being that you guys work with so many churches at so many different scales, both the churches that are, just getting started and are very basic all the way up to the Life Church and Church on the Move and the big guys. What would be something that you would encourage them, or what's a commonality that you would share with them to really put an end to this, tech envy, as we maybe would say, but in order to help them kind of innovate how they reach people?
You mean it's church innovation as a whole? Man, I think we will say this over and over and over. You'll hear me say this, every time I speak to a church is, hey, what's the vision?
Yeah.
For tech directors, worship pastors, tech leaders, find out the best thing that you could do. I think the most valuable thing you could do is find out what's the heartbeat and the vision of your church, of your community. That's the most important thing, hands down.
Sure.
Once you can find that out, even as a company, when we sit down with churches, that's what we want to know. We want to know, what's your vision? We can talk gear and tech all day, but like I said before, there's a lot of people that can do that. That's honestly the easier component. The harder thing is going, what is it that's in your heart? Let's communicate that well. Because if you can, as a tech director or a tech leader, if you can figure out, hey, if I can understand what my pastors and the leaders of my church want, what's the vision? What's our overall vision for the organization? Man, now you can go in and you can build technical systems and you can be innovative within it. But the most important thing is finding out, what is that thing? Who are we called to reach? How are we called to do it? Because honestly, for those people, the greatest innovation may not be the right thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The most stripped down, simple thing might be the right thing in your case.
Yeah.
So understanding and having a super clear vision for what it is that the community is trying to do, or your church community is trying to do, I think is most important. That trumps everything. when it comes to church innovation in tech.
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise, then we're just trying to do the next cool thing, right? And it ends up being just a cycle. And then next thing you know, years later, there's gear in my closet that we don't know where it came from, when it happened, or who ordered it.
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't know if that answers the question well, but I think, man, there's never a time where you could communicate too much vision or understand or learn too much of it, right?
Yep. That's good. Yeah. That's awesome. Talked a little bit about this before too, but Summit TV, I want to dive into that. You guys are releasing a lot of content and just put out like a 6-episode series.
Yeah.
How did that start? And why are these discussions that you guys are having over the important things like race and anything else that you guys have discussed so far? These discussions that you've been having with ministry leaders.
Yeah.
Why are they important to have, especially from Summit?
Wow. Yeah. Man. So, even before it was called Summit TV, Nick Kofal, our chief vision officer, he and I were friends years ago. And man, he would call me when I was in LA and we would just talk. And, before I was working for Summit, he would just share these ideas and visions that he had about sharing these stories that, he'd travel on the East Coast and guys from Summit that sit down and they would meet with pastors on the East Coast. And then there were churches they travel with and speak to on the West Coast. And because of the nature of who we are as a company, people get really comfortable and talk. We have great conversations with church leaders and pastors.
Yeah, for sure.
So they share a lot. And so Nick felt like, man, first off, why are we being told some of these stories and some of these things? Why is God sharing all these things with us, privileging us to be a part at the table at these things? And honestly, what are we supposed to do with this? And so he had this idea of, what if we start to tell these stories that really connected church leaders across the country, because there's tensions that someone's facing here, or maybe something they went through on their staff. And it's the exact same thing the next week that we go and we experience at another church.
Sure.
You go, how can we allow these churches to understand, hey, you're not alone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people dealing with the same things. Some of these topics are very taboo for some reason in the church culture.
Sure.
We need to start talking about it. It's a little bit easier sometimes for us to talk about it because we're technically a company. We're not a ministry or a church.
Sure.
Even though to us it is a ministry, it's a little bit easier for us to tackle some of these topics. So anyway, that's how the idea started, was Nick dreaming about those things. And then when I came on staff 3 years ago, there was already one story that was shot and working on some other stuff. And we just said, man, I said, Nick, in order for us to do what we really need to do, or what's on your heart, we really need the right team to do this, because contracting someone to communicate a vision internally can sometimes be a wrong move. So a buddy of mine, he's actually our creative director now, Gary Hornstein. Gary came on board early on, and whenever we started doing this series and we started telling these stories one by one, we're about 6 or 7 stories in, and the hardest to have more and more tough conversations that we just need to have. We're not trying to solve anything per se, but we need church leaders to talk about this. So for us, even if people take this content that we're shooting and say, hey, we're going to use this as maybe small group material for our staff. We've actually had churches contact us and say, hey, thank you for shooting this, because there's some situations we wanted to have conversations around, and we just played your videos for our church staff and then started discussions afterwards and did almost like a small group type of thing with their staff. Man, however people want to use that content, we just felt like we need to push on the topics.
Sure.
There's an amazing story that I would encourage everybody to go watch on Summit TV, and it's a story by Blaine Bartell and his story. He was a pastor in the 90s and throughout the 2000s. He was a pastor of one of the largest youth ministries in the world, at Church on the Move, actually, at the time, called 180. Had a show in the 80s called Fire by Night. The dude's a legend, right? Incredible guy. But we told his story and what he dealt with. Definitely, it's called Death by a Thousand Lies. It's absolutely incredible. But also too, man, we wanted to challenge people to go, hey, we have a small team. We're telling these stories. You can do the same as a church. You don't have to have a team of 8 people to do this. It may take some time.
Sure.
But, you know, churches can do this in their own communities.
That's
and we
cool.
wanted to kind of model that and lead by example and go, hey, you guys could do this for your organizations too.
Wow.
You know, we have a team that we're not allowed to have volunteers, right? So there's churches that have teams that are 3 times the size of ours that are capable of doing the same. So,
what does a typical team look like that's filming one of these stories?
Yeah, we go out. It's normally 3 of us, one person doing audio.
Sure.
Me or another friend out of Tulsa named Adam Bush. There's a few people that we use, but it's normally 3 of us, one interviewer or director, and then a person shooting, and then somebody doing audio. So typically that's what our team looks like normally.
Cool.
In some shoots if we're lucky, we can have 4, which is awesome for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, we travel with a team of 3, and we go wherever the stories will take us. And man, we're fortunate to have an organization that says, "Hey, let's do this. You know, spend the money. Let's do this because these stories need to be told. We need to push on a boundary and give churches some of these resources."
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Man, there's a lot of good stuff today. Thank you so much, Max, for taking the time with me.
Man,
is there, if there was, you know, any other piece, we've talked about a lot, but if there's one piece of encouragement that you would give churches, again, kind of going into this next season, coming out of what we've been dealing with and going into this new normal, what would you say to churches?
Man, I would say, first, I would say rest. You know, you hear that often, but really spend some time figuring out what does it mean for your team to rest. You know, for most churches, they only have 1 day a week to have off. But really ask yourself the question, is that enough? Is that enough for you, for your team, for your staff? If that is, how are you guys handling that? What does rest look like for you? And then I would say, man, I think there's a bigger component to that where there's so much focus around what we do. Here's what I'm called to do. Here's what I'm called to do. You hear that? Here's my purpose, what I'm called to do. I believe that who we're called to be should drive what we're called to do. So the focus needs to be on, hey, who has God called me to be? Let's spend time there. Let's spend most of our time there. And that should drive what you're called to do, and not the opposite way around. I think so much, man, I've seen so many church leaders and people get lost because they feel like their calling and their mandate in life is to do ministry. It's like, nah, let's be the person God created you to be.
Love that.
Right.
That's cool. Awesome. Thanks, Max. Definitely want you back again sometime. And thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, man.
Cool. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Yeah, it's good, man.